Thanks for coming back for part 3. When I last left you, my foot drum plans had kind of gone awry. I packed the whole thing away in the garage for about 3 years, and in the meantime I did something I'm not proud of. I went and I bought one of these ubiquitous wooden stomp box pedals, just like everyone else. I call it my failure box. Anyway, it turns out they're really rather quite good. But that's not the point. The point is foot drums. Literally 3 years went by until I came up with a new approach, and luckily I filmed most of it this time. I realised that if I wanted my foot drums to go through a loop pedal, I was going to have to go electronic. As much as it goes against everything that's cool about actual drums, it was kind of the only way to go. So I did some research and I ended up buying a Yamaha drum module, the DTX 502. These ones are cheap, compact, and they let you plug in about a dozen drum triggers in the back. I decided to make my own trigger pads by designing a layout on cardboard first and transferring that to plywood. I actually used the same kind of plastic coated plywood that you'd normally make road cases out of. Well, it looks like this will probably be the final arrangement on the pedal board of where everything's going to go. Essentially it's going to be kick, snare, hi-hat, crash, ride. That one may be nothing, I'm not sure yet. So my drum triggers are basically going to go into the drum module. That's going to send a signal into this, and that's going to send a combined signal of my guitar and the drums into the looper and out to a mixer. So the type of trigger that I'm going to be using looks like this. They're very common piezo trigger sensor. They can be used as a little buzzer sometimes in electronic equipment. Now, when you buy them, or at least when I buy them from electronic shops where I live, they look like this. So basically you've got to try and get that out of its plastic shell. I mean, you don't have to, it still works the way it is, but I just can't help feeling that when it's fully exposed like this and glued directly onto the bottom of a pad, it's going to be much more sensitive to vibration than it would be inside this plastic case. The only way to get this out is to press from the other side through that hole, and I'm kind of reluctant to do that, so I don't want to scratch the metal if I can help it. So I've got this drill bit which is about the right size, and I've just stuck a tiny bit of tape on the end of it. That should protect the metal, and let's give it a go. There we go. I'm trying to decide where I actually want to have my little piezo trigger sensor mounted. Now you might think, well, why don't I just put it dead center? Maybe I should put it up near the toe, maybe down towards the back of the trigger pedal. But I'm sort of trying to take into account the ergonomics of my shoe. So this is the type of shoe I usually wear when I play. So I'm looking at this sort of gap here, and that's sort of telling me that I really shouldn't, I don't have any impact with my foot around there. It's probably more around there, maybe even back here. So that would mean I'd be putting my trigger pedal, my trigger sensor somewhere about there on the pad, on the underneath side. Right, well I've set up a little bit of a test here. I've got my drum pad running into the drum machine, running into a little speaker, and already you can tell it's working. Right, now to test the heel. If I'm hitting like this, to me it feels like it's about there. That's where I'm hitting the hardest. Now, if I run a ruler under there, you can see there's actually no contact at the back at all. And in the middle, I don't think I'm getting that much pressure there anyway, so I reckon it's about there. That's the point of most impact. Now for a special feature I've been planning for a while. I don't think this has ever been done before, so it's going to take some explaining. This is going to be my kick pad, and I've got 3 separate triggers on here. The reason for that is because I want to be able to swivel my heel to 3 different positions, as you can see in this design, and I want to make sure that when I do that I still have a good sensitive trigger response from each position. If I just had the one in the middle, then when I swivel my heel to the left, it'll probably be a very weak signal. So I'm going to have all 3, and they're all going to be soldered to the same cable. But why am I doing this? The reason I'm doing this is because I want to actually be able to trigger 3 different bass notes from my guitar. Have you figured out where this is heading? I'm going to use these micro switches, and I haven't actually worked out how I'm going to do this yet, how I'm going to mount them and how the system's going to work, but the plan is to have 1 micro switch in each position, and each micro switch is linked to an individual string pickup on my guitar. What? So that one will be linked to my bottom E string, that's going to be linked to my bottom A string, and that's going to be linked to my bottom D string. And when I swivel my heel into different positions, it's going to not only trigger a kick sound, but it's also going to depress that switch with my foot, and it's going to open up the signal to that particular individual string. So for instance, if I swivel over this way, I get a kick sound plus I get my bottom E string. Over here I get a kick sound plus I get my bottom A string, and over here I get a kick sound plus my bottom D string. All 3 are going to be run into an octave pedal, and that's going to give me a sort of a pseudo bass sound. Drums and bass. One-man band. This version that I'm making today is not going to include the switches because I need to work on that for a bit longer, and I don't even have the other electronics that I need. So I'm building it this way so that I can actually practice swiveling my heel left and right depending on what chord I'm playing, and actually get used to those movements with my foot. Later I'll build a second one of these that includes the switches, but I'll already be practiced at switching back and forth between the positions. So this is kind of like an early version that doesn't include the switches. So that's my snare, which I hooked up earlier into the speaker. This is my kick. So it works. Unfortunately, the 3 triggers are not giving me the same amount of volume. So here's the problem. My snare sensor works fine. My kick sensor, you might remember I've got a sensor here, here, and here. But unfortunately, I'm not sure why, they're all giving me slightly different volumes. Can you hear that one coming through? It's very soft. I'll probably have to adjust some settings in there to make that louder, but so the one on this side is giving me way more volume than those 2. Alright, so I've been experimenting here, and when I plug this one in to the kick channel. That's how loud they all should be. That one's basically as loud as that. So I'm wondering if maybe the way I've wired this is to blame. So I'm going to cut the wires to those two just to tell if actually the center one will come to life. Maybe I've done something here with the wiring. That's the problem. Okay, so now the outside two are completely cut off. The only center turned on now is the center one. No. Still very weak. So I really don't know what the cause is then. Maybe it's a faulty sensor. Or it could be the way I glued it in. Or it could be that when I removed it from the plastic casing that it was in, it got damaged. Could be a bunch of reasons. Could even be a dry solder joint in there. So maybe I'll try that too. Let's try resoldering this. No. Pretty much the same as before, no difference. Okay, so because I'm not an electronics expert, like I know enough, but I'm no expert, I'm just trying to cut out all the variables. So obviously when these come brand new, they're in a plastic case, so when I remove it, possibly it's got damaged, possibly there's just variations in the way these are manufactured, maybe the way I glued it on, maybe even variations in the wood density in different spots there. This plastic surface here is also glued on or bonded to the plywood, so there could be variations along there, but I can only control so much. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to actually solder these together the way I soldered these ones together, and I'm going to see if when I do that, if these all have roughly the same sensitivity just by themselves before any alterations are made. Okay, so I'm going to plug this into the kick terminal on the back. Those are picking up identically, so I think I just must have had some problems with my other ones. What this tells me is that the wiring, the way I've wired this isn't the problem. It's basically telling me that the way I thought it should work is the way it should work. Alright, I'm just holding these in place to check whether they have roughly the same balance. And they do. Huh! I can't even hit my finger. That's cool. You'd think that would be it, right? Nope. Well, after all that work, the triggers work great on their own. But unfortunately they don't work together, because when I put my foot on these, I get so much crosstalk between the two pads that every time I hit the snare, the kick goes off as well, and every time I hit the kick, the snare goes off as well. It's just a big mess. I don't know. I thought I finally had figured this out, but it's really not working. After a lot more testing, I managed to confirm that yes, the sole of my shoe was transmitting vibrations to both pads at the same time. This is called crosstalk, and it happens with electronic drum kits all the time. Now, there are software settings within the drum module that can prevent crosstalk. However, those settings rely on being able to set a threshold between the intentional hits from the drumstick and the accidental vibrations from other pads. For this to work, the intentional hits have to be much more powerful than the accidental ones. But because my foot taps are so soft compared to a drumstick impact, the drum module can't tell much difference between the intentional hits and the accidental vibrations. There is another setting called reject time, which is a small time buffer after a hit where any other vibrations are ignored. Unfortunately, there's just so many little vibrations happening all the time that even the intentional ones don't always get through. So I dove back into research and I looked up every type of drum trigger design known to man. From gluing nuts to the back of piezos, to complex suspension systems, to trigger cones. Nothing really seemed to be suitable for foot drums. So I decided to take another break, for about a year this time.